The afternoon sun was bright over Beverly Hills, bouncing off the windows of luxury stores lined up along the street. People walked by in designer clothes, clutching shopping bags, chatting about watches, cars, and vacations. Among the crowd, a man walked quietly, his steps calm and steady, his head slightly lowered as if he didn't want to draw attention. He was wearing a plain black jacket, jeans that had seen better days, and an old pair of boots. His hair was a little messy, and a few strands fell across his forehead. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing that screamed celebrity. In fact, if you had seen him, you might have thought he was just another regular person out for a walk. But this man was Keanu Reeves, one of Hollywood's most respected actors, known not just for his movies but for his kindness and humility. Still, in that moment, no one around him seemed to notice who he was. Keanu wasn't out shopping for himself. He had come to this part of town because he wanted to buy a special gift for someone. It wasn't for a celebrity friend or a business partner. It was for a longtime member of his film crew, someone who had worked behind the scenes for years, often unnoticed, but who had always treated him with respect and warmth. That person's birthday was coming up soon, and Keanu wanted to surprise them with something meaningful, something lasting. He had been told about a particular watch, a model known for its timeless design and fine craftsmanship. It wasn't about the brand or the price tag. It was about the story behind it. The watchmaker was known for creating pieces that symbolized loyalty and time well spent, values that Keanu appreciated deeply. As he reached the entrance of the watch boutique, he took a quiet breath. The store looked impressive from the outside. Tall glass doors, shiny silver handles, and a window display filled with elegant timepieces. Inside, soft music played, and the air was cool and scented faintly with polished wood and leather. Keanu pushed the door open and stepped in. The moment he entered, a little bell chimed, and a few people inside turned to look. Most of them quickly looked away, assuming he was just another window shopper. The store was filled with glass cases arranged neatly, each holding watches that gleamed under warm golden lights. There were leather chairs near the corners, where well-dressed customers sat while sipping sparkling water, waiting for an attendant to bring out selections for them. Keanu's eyes moved slowly over the displays. He wasn't in a hurry. He wanted to see things carefully to find something that felt right. At the far end of the store stood a saleswoman, talking to another customer. She looked elegant, her hair perfectly styled, her outfit neat and expensive. When her customer left, she glanced around and noticed Keanu standing by one of the displays. Her expression changed slightly. She watched him for a few seconds, her eyes narrowing just a little. From where she stood, she could see his old jacket and his boots that looked a little worn. In her mind, he didn't look like someone who belonged in that kind of boutique. She walked toward him slowly, with a practiced smile that wasn't exactly friendly, more like polite curiosity. "Good afternoon," she said, her tone sweet but distant. "Can I help you with something?" Keanu looked up and returned the smile. His voice was calm and gentle. "Yes, please. I was hoping to take a look at some of your watches. I'm looking for something classic and maybe one of your limited editions." The saleswoman blinked. "Limited editions?" She looked at him again, taking in his simple clothes, his quiet presence. Something about his calmness made her unsure for a moment, but she quickly brushed it off. "These watches are quite expensive," she said carefully. "They start at around $10,000. Are you sure that's what you're looking for?" Her words hung in the air, polite but slightly sharp. A couple of nearby customers looked over, sensing a bit of tension. Keanu didn't react. He just nodded and said, "And that's fine. I'd still like to take a look if that's all right." The saleswoman's smile stiffened. She gave a small uneasy laugh, as if trying to figure out whether he was joking. "Of course," she said finally. "Let me see which models we have available." She walked to the counter and picked up a tray of watches, but instead of bringing out the more exclusive models, she chose a few of the simpler ones. She placed them on the glass in front of him, her tone light but distant. "These are from our entry-level collection. They're very nice and more affordable." Keanu looked at the watches politely. They were fine, but they weren't what he had come for. "Actually," he said softly, pointing to the display behind her, "I was interested in that one, the silver piece in the back with the dark blue dial. I heard it's part of your limited series." The saleswoman hesitated. That particular watch was one of the store's premium models. the kind that collectors reserved months in advance. She looked at him again, her expression uncertain, and then she gave a quick, practiced laugh. "Oh," she said, trying to sound polite. "That model is quite exclusive. Usually only serious buyers inquire about it. It's not for casual browsing." Keanu nodded slowly. "I understand," he said, still calm. "I'd just like to see it if possible." Her voice dropped a little lower, her patience starting to thin. "Sir, that watch costs more than most cars. It's not exactly something people look at unless they're ready to make a purchase." A few people nearby pretended not to listen, but were clearly paying attention. The quiet store suddenly felt heavy with awkward silence. Keanu didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, didn't even frown. He simply smiled and said, "I appreciate that. I'll be careful." The saleswoman sighed quietly and shook her head. "I'm sorry, but we don't usually take out that model unless there's an appointment or verification of purchase interest." Keanu looked at her for a moment. Not angry, just thoughtful. Then he gave a small nod and said, "All right, thank you anyway." He turned slightly and looked back at the display near the front of the store. The sunlight from outside glinted off the glass, and he could see his own reflection. Simple, ordinary, unremarkable. He was used to that. He never dressed to impress. He dressed for comfort. But he also knew that in some places, how you looked mattered more than who you were. The saleswoman went back to her counter, whispering something to another employee. They both glanced at Keanu and smiled faintly, the kind of smile people share when they think they've figured someone out. Keanu continued to browse quietly. He wasn't upset, not really. He had seen this kind of behavior before, people making assumptions based on clothes or posture or tone. It didn't surprise him anymore. Still, there was something sad about it. After a few minutes, he took another look at the limited edition display. The watch really was beautiful. Simple, clean lines, a deep blue face, and fine craftsmanship that spoke of time and care. It reminded him of the person he wanted to give it to, someone who had given their time and care to others for years without asking for anything in return. He stood there for a while, thinking when another staff member, an older man, walked out from a back office. He noticed Keanu immediately, and his eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Excuse me," the man said, walking over with genuine warmth. "Mr. Reeves?" The saleswoman froze mid-step. She turned quickly, her eyes wide. Keanu looked up, surprised but smiling. "Yes," he said softly. "Hello," the older man extended his hand, clearly honored. "It's such a pleasure to meet you, sir. Welcome to our store. How can we assist you today?" Before Keanu could answer, the saleswoman stood very still behind the counter, her earlier confidence fading quickly. The color drained from her face as she realized who she had just spoken to. "I was just hoping to take a look at one of your pieces," Keanu said calmly, as if nothing unusual had happened. "The limited series and the one with the blue dial." Of course," the manager said immediately, turning to the woman. "Please bring it out right away." She nodded quickly, fumbling with the keys. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlocked the display case and carefully placed the watch on a velvet tray. She avoided Keanu's eyes as she handed it over. Keanu thanked her kindly and took the watch gently in his hands. It was elegant, balanced, and beautifully made. He turned it slowly, admiring the details. The craftsmanship was even better than he had imagined. The manager smiled proudly. "It's one of our best," he said. "Only a few were made worldwide." Keanu nodded. "It's perfect," he said simply. "I'll take it." The saleswoman looked up, shocked. You'll take it?" "Yes," Keanu said, still calm. "It's a gift." He handed the watch back for wrapping and waited quietly while the transaction was processed. The store had gone almost completely silent now. The few customers who had witnessed the earlier exchange whispered among themselves. As he stood there, Keanu noticed the saleswoman's face, embarrassed, regretful, uncertain. He could tell she wished she could take back her earlier words. But he didn't say anything. He just smiled gently when she finally handed him the wrapped box. "Thank you," he said softly. "I appreciate your help." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She just nodded, her eyes downcast. Keanu gave her a small nod, then turned and walked out of the store, the same quiet calm in his step as when he had entered. The bell above the door chimed softly as he left, and the sunlight outside seemed a little brighter. Behind him, the saleswoman stood still, her thoughts heavy. She had just learned, in the simplest and most humbling way, that appearances can be deceiving and that sometimes the people who look the most ordinary are the ones who carry the most extraordinary grace. The moment Keanu left the store, the atmosphere inside shifted. The bell above the door chimed softly behind him, but it seemed louder than it had been just moments ago. A few people in the store looked at each other in silence, while the saleswoman stood frozen at the counter, still processing what had just happened. She was embarrassed. Her face was flushed, and she could feel the heat rising from her chest to her cheeks. The entire situation had played out so differently than she had expected. She had assumed that Keanu Reeves was just another person who wandered in looking at things he couldn't afford. It was a mistake, and it stung. For a few seconds, she stood there unsure of what to do. Her hands rested on the counter, and she stared at the spot where Keanu had been standing. The other salespeople in the store, who had been quietly watching the scene unfold, now murmured to each other. One of them, a younger woman, glanced at the saleswoman with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Are you okay?" the younger woman asked quietly. The saleswoman didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a slow breath and shook her head. She had tried to brush off the man in the beginning, assuming he was just another window shopper who wouldn't buy anything. But now, thinking about how she had treated him, she felt embarrassed. I didn't know," she muttered, almost to herself. "I didn't know it was him." The other woman looked at her, confused. "Him? Who?" "Keanu Reeves," the saleswoman replied, her voice soft but clear now. "I didn't realize who he was. I thought he was just some regular guy." She sighed heavily, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I was rude to him. I made assumptions." The younger saleswoman paused, her eyes widening. "Wait, you were rude to Keanu Reeves?" The saleswoman nodded slowly, her eyes tracing the floor. She could still feel the awkwardness in her chest, the sting of having misjudged someone so thoroughly. "Great," the younger woman whispered, almost to herself, but loud enough for the saleswoman to hear. "That's going to be one for the books." The saleswoman didn't respond. She didn't know what to say. How could she explain that she had let her judgment get the better of her? She had seen so many rich people come in and out of the store, their fancy clothes and flashy attitudes a constant reminder of the superficiality of wealth. It wasn't that she meant to be rude, it was just that in her world she had learned to expect a certain kind of customer. And when Keanu had walked in, his appearance had defied that expectation. She had made a snap judgment based on how he looked, and now she was paying the price. She couldn't stop thinking about how Keanu had handled it, so calm, so polite, so unbothered by her assumptions. He had been gracious even when she had been less than kind. And then there was his response. "It's all right. Everyone has bad days." It had been simple, but it stuck with her. It stuck in a way that made her realize just how much she had misunderstood him. The store was quieter now. The manager was still off in the back, preparing the transaction for the watch Keanu had purchased. The saleswoman stood still for a moment longer, her mind racing. How could she have been so careless? Why hadn't she just asked him who he was before jumping to conclusions? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the doorbell again. She looked up, startled, to see the manager returning holding a small wrapped box in his hands. "There you go," he said, his voice cheerful as he placed the box on the counter in front of her. "Mr. Reeves's watch is all set. Just make sure you send it to the address he requested." The saleswoman looked at the box for a moment, her hands now trembling slightly. It wasn't just the watch. It was the realization of what she had done. Keanu had walked in, expecting to be treated like any other customer, but instead he had faced her judgment and condescension. The manager, sensing her discomfort, cleared his throat. "You okay? You seem a little off." The saleswoman didn't answer immediately. She didn't know how to explain it, how to tell him that she had just learned a hard lesson. She finally looked up, meeting his gaze, and nodded slowly. She stopped, unsure of how to put it into words. "I misjudged him. And I was rude. I can't believe I did that." The manager gave her a sympathetic look, but his tone remained neutral. "It happens. People don't always know who's walking through that door. But you need to be careful. You never know who someone might be." "I know," the saleswoman said softly. "I know. And now I feel embarrassed. I've never done that before." The manager didn't say anything more. He simply nodded and turned to walk away. But before he left, he paused and glanced back at her. "Just remember, sometimes people come in here who don't look like they belong, but they do. Don't let your first impression guide you. The saleswoman nodded, but her mind was still far away. She was thinking about Keanu, how he had carried himself with grace, how he hadn't reacted to her rudeness. She thought about how easy it was to fall into the trap of assuming someone's worth based on how they looked. How easy it was to judge someone before you knew them. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chiming of the store's bell once again. She looked up, startled to see a man standing by the door looking in. He was tall and thin, wearing a casual t-shirt and jeans, his eyes scanning the store curiously. The man looked familiar to the saleswoman, but she couldn't place him. He wasn't someone who looked like he belonged in a high-end boutique either, but she was done making assumptions now. She knew better. "Can I help you?" she asked softly, her tone more respectful this time. The man smiled, gently nodding. "I'm just looking for a gift," he said. "Something for my wife. She loves watches." The saleswoman didn't offer any judgment this time. She didn't try to guess his financial situation based on his clothes. She simply smiled and led him toward the display. As she walked with him, she realized that it wasn't just Keanu who had changed her today. It was the experience itself, the realization that she needed to open her mind, that not everything could be judged by appearance. She needed to treat everyone with the same respect, regardless of who they were or what they looked like. She spent the next few hours helping the new customer, being kind and helpful, and not letting her assumptions get in the way, but her mind kept drifting back to Keanu, and she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for the lesson he had taught her, without even meaning to. That night, as she sat at home, her thoughts were still focused on the afternoon. She replayed the moment over and over in her mind, thinking about how she had spoken to Keanu. She could feel the sting of her own words, the assumptions she had made about him. And she realized more than anything that she had learned something very important that day. People are more than their appearance. They are more than what you think they are. And sometimes you can be surprised by the kindness and humility of the people you least expect. The next morning, the saleswoman couldn't shake the events of the day before. Keanu Reeves, the calm, kind man who had walked into the store with nothing more than a quiet confidence, had left an impression on her that she couldn't forget. She replayed the entire interaction over and over in her mind. His calm demeanor, the way he hadn't reacted when she had been dismissive, his gentle smile as he paid for the watch, and his simple words, "It's all right. Everyone has bad days." She couldn't help but wonder if she would have handled the situation differently had she known who he was from the start. Would she have been kinder? More respectful? Probably. But that didn't excuse her behavior. What stung the most was how easy it had been for her to judge him based on how he looked. She had been working at the store for a few years now, and she'd seen all kinds of people come and go. Celebrities, athletes, the wealthy, and the everyday customers who were just there to browse. She'd learned to tell the difference between those who were serious buyers and those who just wanted to look at expensive things but had no intention of purchasing. But what she hadn't expected was the man in front of her. He didn't look like a celebrity, and that had caused her to dismiss him, something she deeply regretted now. Her colleagues had tried to comfort her, but the guilt lingered. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had treated someone poorly, and that thought weighed heavily on her. It wasn't like her. She prided herself on being kind to everyone, no matter who they were. But in that moment, her assumptions had gotten the best of her. As she sat at her desk, staring out the window, she thought about how the story would play out. She knew Keanu wasn't the type to cause a scene, but she also knew that word of the incident would get around, and the last thing she wanted was for her mistake to become a topic of gossip. She couldn't help but wonder if anyone else had noticed what had happened. Her phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from a colleague who had been working the counter when Keanu had walked in. "You won't believe this," the text read. "I just saw a post online about what happened yesterday. Someone was in the store when Keanu came in. They're talking about how he handled the whole thing with such grace. He didn't even blink when you gave him attitude. So calm, so kind." The saleswoman's heart sank. The post had already made its way online, and soon, everyone would know about the awkward moment between her and Keanu. The shame washed over her like a wave, and she felt her face heat up. She quickly opened the message, reading the comments beneath the post. The people who had witnessed the exchange were commenting on how polite Keanu had been, how he didn't seem to care about the way he'd been treated. One person even mentioned how they had seen Keanu smile warmly at the saleswoman before leaving, as if nothing had happened. It was true. Keanu hadn't seemed bothered at all. In fact, he had been more gracious than she could have imagined. The more she read the comments, the worse she felt. Not just for herself, but for how she had let her assumptions cloud her judgment. The post had gone viral, and now people everywhere were praising Keanu's kindness. Her mistake had become a reminder for everyone about how quick people could be to judge. She spent the rest of the morning distracted, unable to focus on anything. All she could think about was the fact that Keanu had handled the situation with such poise, while she had reacted from a place of judgment and arrogance. She had treated him as if he was just another customer, not even taking the time to realize that he was someone she should have respected from the start. By lunchtime, the entire store was buzzing with whispers. Customers were coming in, and even some of the staff were talking about the viral post. Keanu's name was on everyone's lips. Keanu Reeves, that guy who was in the store yesterday, people were saying. He was so calm, so humble. He didn't let that saleswoman get to him. The saleswoman couldn't escape it. She overheard bits and pieces of the conversation as she walked past the other employees. Her co-workers were discussing how amazing it was that someone like Keanu, who could have easily thrown his weight around, had chosen not to. They admired him for his quiet demeanor, his ability to rise above the situation. The saleswoman felt her stomach tighten. She didn't deserve any of that praise. Keanu deserved it all, not just for how he handled the incident, but for the way he had treated her, despite the way she had treated him. She had assumed so much about him based on nothing more than his appearance, and now it was clear that he was the bigger person in every sense. As the day went on, she received a few more messages from her friends and family, all of them expressing sympathy for her. They understood that it was an honest mistake. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that it wasn't just about the mistake. It was about her attitude, her judgment, and the way she had allowed her perception of someone to affect her behavior. She knew that she needed to apologize, to make things right. But she also knew that she couldn't just apologize to Keanu. She needed to apologize to herself for letting her assumptions guide her actions. It wasn't just about being rude to him. It was about the way she had let her own insecurities and biases shape her behavior. She sat at her desk, staring at her phone, contemplating the best way to reach out to him. She could send a message, or she could try to contact him through the store's management. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that an apology wasn't something that could be easily fixed with a few words. It had to be something more meaningful. Later that afternoon, as the store started to quiet down, the saleswoman walked into the back office. She needed a moment to herself to think about what to do next. She wasn't sure how long she had been standing there, lost in thought, when the store manager walked in. "You all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. She nodded, but the weight of the situation still hung heavily on her shoulders. "I saw the post about what happened yesterday," the manager continued. "Don't worry too much about it. It happens. People get carried away. But you know what? Keanu was a class act. He didn't make a big deal out of it. He didn't even bring it up." "I know," she replied softly, "and that's what makes it worse. I feel ashamed. I shouldn't have treated him that way." The manager leaned against the door frame, watching her for a moment. "You know, sometimes we all make mistakes. It's part of being human. But it's how we learn from those mistakes that counts." The saleswoman looked up at him, her eyes a little moist. "I've learned, all right. I've learned that I need to stop judging people by how they look. I've let that shape my view of the world for too long." The manager smiled softly. "I think you're already on your way to learning that. It's not easy, but you're getting there." She took a deep breath and nodded. "I just want to make things right. I don't know how, but I have to." The manager nodded in understanding. "Start with yourself. Be kind to yourself. And maybe, just maybe, Keanu will understand too. He's the kind of guy who values honesty and humility." The saleswoman smiled faintly, feeling a small weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't sure how things would play out, but one thing was certain. She was going to be different from now on. She had learned her lesson the hard way, but she was determined not to let it define her. The days passed slowly for the saleswoman after the incident with Keanu. Every time she walked into the store, she could feel the weight of her mistake, the nagging feeling that everyone knew what had happened. It wasn't like anyone had openly discussed it with her, but there was an underlying tension in the air. She couldn't ignore the fact that word had gotten around. Despite the discomfort, she knew she had to find a way to move forward. She had apologized to herself, and now she had to figure out how to make things right with Keanu. She had thought about it over and over, sending an email, making a phone call, or even writing a letter. But none of those options felt genuine enough. She didn't want her apology to feel like a formality. She wanted to show him that she had truly understood the lesson he had unknowingly taught her. One afternoon, a week after the incident, she found herself thinking about the apology again. She'd been working on the shop floor, helping a customer when she noticed a familiar face at the door. It wasn't until he stepped closer that she realized who it was. Keanu Reeves walked in. Her heart skipped a beat. The moment felt surreal. She couldn't believe it. He was here again, and he was walking straight toward her. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron and forced a smile, trying to stay calm despite the nervous energy buzzing in her chest. Keanu seemed just as relaxed as he had been the last time. He wore simple clothes again, a jacket and jeans, looking every bit the humble man he had shown himself to be. He gave her a friendly nod as he approached the counter. "Hi," he said, his voice warm and calm. "I'm looking for something special." For a moment, she just stared at him, caught off guard. It felt like time had slowed down. He hadn't brought up what happened, didn't seem angry or uncomfortable. It was like nothing had changed, but everything had. She snapped out of her daze and quickly regained her composure. "Of course. What kind of watch are you looking for?" He smiled, his eyes twinkling as though he had forgotten about the awkward moment from before. "Something simple. I'm not looking for anything too flashy." She nodded, moving to show him a few of the elegant, understated pieces. But as she did, her mind raced. She had to apologize. She couldn't let this opportunity slip by. As she pulled out a selection of watches, she tried to steady her nerves. Keanu stood there, looking at the different styles, his expression thoughtful. He seemed perfectly at ease, as though everything was normal. And yet, for her, everything was anything but. She took a deep breath and decided it was now or never. She had to say it. She couldn't pretend like the past week hadn't happened. "I just wanted to say something," she said, her voice a little shaky. Keanu turned his attention to her, his eyes full of curiosity but not judgment. "I know I wasn't very kind to you when you came in last time. I was rude, and I felt terrible about it ever since." Keanu blinked, his expression softening. "Oh, you don't have to apologize for that," he said, his voice still calm, though there was a warmth to it. "It wasn't a big deal." She shook her head. "No, it was. You came in here and I made assumptions about you based on how you looked. I didn't treat you with the respect you deserve. And I'm sorry for that." Keanu smiled gently as though he understood exactly what she was saying. "I appreciate you saying that. But honestly, don't worry about it. Everyone has moments when they're not at their best." His words made her feel a little lighter, but the guilt still lingered. She wasn't just apologizing for a mistake. She was apologizing because she had learned something important about herself. "I just don't want you to think I'm like that," she said quietly. "I don't want to be someone who judges people based on their appearance. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I've realized I've been wrong. I want to be better." Keanu nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "You are better. The fact that you're acknowledging it shows that." His response left her speechless for a moment. She had expected him to brush her off, to act distant or uncomfortable, but instead he had responded with kindness and understanding. The weight in her chest began to lift, but the truth was, there was still a small part of her that felt ashamed. As they continued to talk about watches, Keanu's presence seemed to change the atmosphere in the store. It wasn't just that he was a celebrity. It was the way he carried himself. There was a quiet humility to him that made it impossible not to admire. He didn't act like someone who was above others. He was simply kind. As she helped him choose the right watch, she realized how much she had underestimated him. It wasn't about the money or the fame. It was about the way he treated people, how he made others feel valued without making a big show of it. When it was time for him to leave, he gave her a warm smile, as though everything had been settled between them. "Thanks again," he said, his tone genuine. "I'm glad we could talk." She nodded, her voice a little softer than before. "Thank you for being understanding. It means a lot to me." Keanu paused for a moment as if he wanted to say something else. Then he simply nodded and walked toward the door, his footsteps calm and steady. The bell above the door chimed softly as he stepped outside, and the saleswoman was left standing at the counter, a mix of emotions swirling in her chest. She felt relieved, but she also felt something else inspired. The way Keanu had handled the situation, with such grace and humility, made her want to be a better person. He hadn't just forgiven her. He had helped her learn and grow. And in that moment, she realized that the experience hadn't been about her embarrassment or her mistake. It had been about learning how to treat others with respect, how to challenge her own assumptions, and how to always strive to be better. As the day went on, she felt a shift in herself. She was more present with the customers, more patient and more mindful of her interactions. She wasn't perfect and she didn't expect to be, but she was trying, and that was what mattered. And then a week later, she received a small package in the mail. It was addressed to her, and when she opened it, she found a handwritten note and a small gift. The note read, "Thank you for the kindness you showed me. You're doing just fine. Keep being you." The saleswoman smiled as she read the note, her heart warming. She knew now that this wasn't just about one mistake. It was about growth, change, and learning from each experience. She couldn't undo what had happened, but she could move forward, knowing that she had done her best, and maybe, just maybe, that was all that anyone could ask for. Weeks had passed since the last time Keanu Reeves had walked into the store. Life had returned to a sense of normalcy for the saleswoman. She had taken the lessons she'd learned to heart, making a conscious effort to treat every customer with the same respect and kindness that she had come to understand was so important. The incident with Keanu had become a turning point for her, and even though it had been uncomfortable, it had shaped her in a way that made her more aware of her actions and her assumptions. One afternoon, while she was working the counter, a regular customer walked in, someone she had seen many times before. They were an older man, always polite but with a sense of quiet intensity. He made his way to the watch section, just as he always did when he visited. As she approached to ask if he needed any assistance, she was caught off guard when he suddenly looked up at her with a serious expression. "I heard what happened with that guy a while back," he said, his voice low. The saleswoman froze for a moment, unsure of where this conversation was heading. She had no idea who he was talking about. "Keanu Reeves?" he asked, seeing her confusion. She swallowed hard. Yeah, I guess it's been all over the store." "I didn't mean for anyone to know about it." The man raised an eyebrow. "You didn't? Well, people are talking about it, and the way he handled it, it says a lot about him, doesn't it?" "Yeah, it does," she replied quietly, feeling the old guilt rising up in her chest. She had made her peace with it, but the fact that people were still talking about it made her feel exposed, as if the incident was something that couldn't be forgotten. The man's eyes softened. "You've learned something, haven't you?" She nodded. "I have. It wasn't just about him being famous or anything. It was about how I treated him, how I judged him without knowing anything about him. I've been trying to be better ever since." The customer gave her a slow, appreciative smile. "You're human. We all make mistakes. It's what you do with them that counts." His words lingered with her long after the conversation ended. It was a simple reminder that everyone, no matter their status, was capable of learning from their mistakes. And that's what she had done. She had learned. Not just from the incident with Keanu, but from her own self-reflection over the past few weeks. The process had not been easy, but it had been necessary. A few days later, the saleswoman found herself in the store again, standing behind the counter as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor. The door chimed as a new customer entered. She looked up and her heart skipped a beat. It was Keanu. He was back. This time, she was prepared. She no longer felt that tight knot of shame in her stomach. She had worked through that, and she had come to realize that sometimes the best way to make things right was just to be yourself. So when he walked toward the counter, she met his gaze with a smile, genuine and warm. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice steady. Keanu smiled back, the same calm, friendly smile that had disarmed her so many weeks ago. "Hey there," he replied, walking up to the counter. "I was hoping you could help me again. I'm looking for something a little different this time." "Of course," she said, relieved that the awkwardness she had feared wasn't there. She moved to show him a few watches, her hands steady, her confidence restored. As she helped him pick out a new watch, She couldn't help but notice how different things felt this time. There was no tension, no undercurrent of guilt. They were just two people, having a normal conversation about watches. The world hadn't stopped when she had made her mistake. Life had moved on, and so had she. "Are you still doing all right?" Keanu asked casually. It was the kind of question that wasn't meant to be probing, but more of a check-in, as if he genuinely cared. She hesitated for a moment. "Yeah. You know, I've learned a lot in the past few weeks," she said, feeling the truth of her words in the air between them. "I was kind of a mess when you came in last time. But I've been working on myself." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "In what way?" She thought about the question. "Well, I've realized that I was quick to judge people. I used to make assumptions about them based on how they looked or acted. I thought I could figure people out at first glance. But it's not like that. Everyone has their own story, and I'm trying to stop judging them before I really know who they are." Keanu's smile grew a little. "That's a good lesson to learn. It's easy to assume things about people, but it's not always accurate." She nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Exactly. And honestly, I'm thankful for the wake-up call. It's made me a better person." Keanu nodded approvingly. "I'm glad to hear that. We all go through those moments where we need to stop and reflect. It's what makes us who we are." She looked at him, feeling a sense of respect for him that she hadn't fully realized before. It wasn't just his calmness in the face of a difficult situation. It was the way he made others feel comfortable, the way he was willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. That was a rare quality, and she admired it. As Keanu made his purchase and turned to leave, he paused for a moment, looking back at her. "You know," he said with a thoughtful smile, "I'm really glad we had that conversation. It's important to talk about these things." "Me too," she replied. "Thank you for being so understanding." Keanu gave her a brief nod, then left the store. As the door closed behind him, she let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It was over, and in some ways it had been one of the most meaningful conversations she'd ever had with a customer. More than just about watches or purchases, it was about growth, understanding, and the power of an honest exchange. The saleswoman stood there for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened. It had all started with one small moment of judgment, one quick assumption that had turned out to be completely wrong. But in the end, that mistake had led her to a better place. It had led her to a more authentic version of herself, someone who didn't shy away from admitting their flaws, and someone who was willing to learn from them. In the weeks that followed, she noticed a change in herself that went beyond just the way she treated customers. It was a deeper, more personal shift. She became more patient with herself and others, less likely to jump to conclusions. She began to appreciate the stories behind the faces she saw every day. No longer did she look at people and make snap judgments. Now she saw potential, and she saw humanity. It wasn't just about being polite or friendly, it was about being real. And that, she realized, was the most important thing of all. As for Keanu, she never expected him to make a big deal out of their encounter. But every time he walked into the store, he made her feel like she was doing something right. Maybe that's what true humility was. Not drawing attention to yourself, but simply leading by example, allowing others to find their own way. And so, she continued her work at the store, with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of who she was. She wasn't perfect, but she was better than she had been before, and that was all that really mattered.